The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus went across the Sea of Galilee. A large crowd followed him, because they saw the signs he was performing on the sick. Jesus went up on a mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. The Jewish feast of Passover was near. When Jesus raised his eyes and saw that a large crowd was coming to him, he said to Philip, "Where can we buy enough food for them to eat?" He said this to test him, because he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 200 days' wages worth of food would not be enough for each of them to have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, the brother of Simon Peter, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what good are these for so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people recline." Now there was a great deal of grass in that place, so the men reclined, about 5,000 in number. Then Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed them to those who were reclining, and also as much of the fish as they wanted. When they had had their fill, he said to his disciples, "Gather the fragments left over, so that nothing will be wasted." So they collected them and filled 12 wicker baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves that had been more than they could eat. When the people saw the sign he had done, they said, "This is truly the prophet, the one who is to come into the world." Since Jesus knew that they were going to come and carry him off to make him king, he withdrew again to the mountain alone. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Good afternoon. Jesus would normally have what we call table fellowship with sinners. So he would normally go and eat with sinners. We call that table fellowship with sinners. He would eat. And he was just, more or less, he was around 30 years old, and he must have had good appetite. So he would always be eating with sinners, in fact. To the dismay of the scribes and the Pharisees, to the elders, the chief priests. Why? Because if he comes from God, then he should not have anything at all to do with sinners. And so the concept of purity is always delineated. It's always distinct or distinguished from the concept of sin. And so if you are pure, you have nothing to do with sin. And yet Jesus broke bread with sinners. He had what we call table fellowship with sinners, not because he tolerated sinners, but because he had a good news for them. And that good news was hope. And that good news was divine presence. And that good news was conversion. That good news was new life. And therefore, Jesus comes to us sinners, not in order to defend us sinners, and that we remain sinners just like that. Rather, Jesus comes to us in order to transform our condition. Sinful as we may be, yet we have a God who comes to us to transform us, to make us like Him. And what better way for Jesus to make us like Him than to give us a part of Himself, to become part of Himself. You see, the grass becomes part of the body of the cow. And when I eat beef, the body of the cow becomes part of me. You see, from the grass to the cow to man. And therefore Jesus wants to give us, or wanted to give us His own body, so that then He would become part of us. And that is very much deliberated on by Jesus. Jesus really intended to do it that way. And that is why phase by phase He would do it. So phase 1 would be His table fellowship with sinners. Phase 2 would be His multiplication of loaves. And this is now the second phase, the multiplication of loaves. He wanted to be part of us, and therefore He answers our need. We are hungry, and therefore Jesus responds to our hunger. But there is a greater hunger, the hunger for the sacred, the hunger for truth, the hunger for love. These are deeper forms of hunger in us. And therefore, even that, Jesus wanted to address that kind of hunger. Hunger for the sacred, hunger for truth, hunger for love. The hunger for the sacred is given to us in terms of presence, divine presence. And people would be fascinated by Jesus. They would be fascinated with the way He spoke to them, with the way He would be with them, because there was just something divine in Him. Notice that people came in droves. When Jesus raised His eyes and saw that a large crowd was coming to Him, He said to Philip, "Where can we buy enough food for them to eat?" Jesus said this to test Him, because He Himself knew what He was going to do. So the first phase, we were talking about table fellowship with sinners. The second phase, we're now talking about the multiplication of loaves. And so He would feed the crowd. He would feed their hunger, their physical hunger. And yet, at the same time, Jesus would feed their hunger for the divine, their hunger for the sacred. And Jesus proclaimed the good news to them. Jesus preached to them. And He gave them the truth of His Father. And so the hunger for truth was also addressed by Jesus. And finally, the hunger for love. How He would forgive individual sinners would reveal His concept of loving people and the need to be loved. The hunger on the part of humanity, the hunger for love, the hunger for forgiveness. Having fulfilled this second phase, Jesus would go to the third phase. And the third phase would be the institution of the Holy Eucharist. And that is why here, at the multiplication of loaves, we already have Eucharistic overtones. Look at the verbs being used by Jesus. He took bread. He gave thanks. He broke bread. He distributed them. These are the words of the institution of the Eucharist. He broke bread. He took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and gave it to His disciples. And so the third phase would be the institution of the Eucharist. Why? Because Jesus wanted in the Eucharist to become part of us. So that our hunger for the divine presence would really be met. Friends, brothers and sisters, the way Jesus responds, the way Jesus answers our needs is just so amazing. We have a God who comes to us. He could just have saved us remotely by remote control and he would just say, okay, all of you, you go to heaven, be saved. That would have been a shortcut. But Jesus wanted to become part of us. God sent His Son to become like one of us. And being identified with us and being one of us, now it would be easy for Jesus to become part of our life. You're talking about bread. Bread is the staple food for the Middle Eastern and for the West also. For us Asians, we have rice for our staple food. But for the Middle Eastern countries in the West, they normally have bread. And yet, in this context, the poor boy had 2 barley loaves. Barley loaves. And 2 fish. Here. 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. So just imagine, barley loaves are supposed to be the bread of the poor. So it's the poor man's bread. And so the little boy here would become like the hero. Why? Because he gave up what little he had. Poor as he was, he had only 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. Poor as he was, he gave everything that he had. What if the little boy refused to share what he had? What if the little boy would reason this way? Hey, I'm just poor and I'm hungry. And you're taking this out from me? You're taking this from me? What about my human right? To be fed, to be satisfied, to eat. If that little boy was very self-centered, then there wouldn't have been that big miracle of the multiplication of loaves. So look at the gesture of that little boy in sharing what little he had. And if you share the only thing that you have, that is what you call heroic sharing, heroic giving, heroic charity. You give all that you have. Well, there are many kinds of giving. We can give because we are maybe assured that someday that person to whom we give something will return the favor. Or maybe we give out of our extra. Or maybe we give in a way, I am assured that I can always buy something more, even better than what I give. And there are people who give out of proportion, just proportionate to their income. But this little boy gave everything that he had. 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. Heroic charity. And the charity of the little boy begot charity. So we have charity begets charity. How did it happen? The charity of God. Thomas Aquinas, when he talks about the charity of God, it is something unconditional. He would always describe it as something gratuitous. unconditioned by any reason, by any situation. No. It is always gratuitous, freely given. And therefore, what was freely given by the little boy, now Jesus would freely multiply the loaves. Charity begets charity. Jesus wants to become part of us, then let charity be part of us. Charity begets charity. Then let charity also become part of us, so that if Jesus becomes part of us, then charity becomes the most normal, the most ordinary way of living as Christians. The mode of life, the most ordinary mode of life, the most ordinary mode of existence for Christians is charity. The heroic charity of the little boy who had 5 loaves and 2 fish. Cultivated, or rather led to, that charity of God, the abundance of the power of God, the mercy of God, the love of God. And now Jesus addresses not just the hunger for food, but the hunger for the sacred, the hunger for truth, and the hunger for love. Because Jesus wants to be part of us. He wants to be bread for us. And the multiplication of loaves, the multiplication of bread is just a gesture, a prophetic gesture, a sign that someday I will be the one to be broken. I will be the one to be shared, because I will become bread for you.